Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thriving Students Happy Parents Summit. On this summit, experts share their knowledge and experience on how to support children through happy, healthy, and successful academic years. My name is Anna Alba, and my guest today has been voted by the New York Times the #2 most impactful woman of 2015 after Hillary Clinton. She received many awards as human rights activist. She is former filmmaker whose movies make impact and continue to change the world. And she is the founder and CEO of education charity Think Equal. It's my great honor to welcome you and introduce you, Leslee Udwin.
Thank you
Welcome,
so
Leslie.
much. Thank you, Anna.
And today we'll discuss with you, Leslie, why you think that some changes should be brought to education during this interview. But first, please tell us a little about yourself. So you are an actress and filmmaker. What brought you to this to education?
So I was an actress a very long time ago. I then became a producer and feature filmmaker, and then became a director and documentary filmmaker. And in fact, it was my last film that made me leave all of that behind me. I am no longer those things. I am now purely an activist and campaigner for us to reimagine education and to achieve a system change in education. That has become, to me, the whole purpose and mission of my life. And what brought me here really was the last film I made. It's a documentary called India's Daughter. And I went to India to film this account of a really horrific, brutal gang rape and murder of a young medical student in India, in Delhi. And it was a horrific crime, a gang rape after which this young girl's intestines were hanging out of her body. And she was thrown on the side of the road like a valueless piece of rubbish. And in the course of making this film, I actually sat for 31 hours with her rapists and other rapists. I felt I needed to understand the men who could do something like this, what kind of human beings they were. And in pursuit of that understanding, because it seemed to me we can't change them unless we really understand them, I really discovered the most extraordinary life-changing insights. The most important of which were that these men had been programmed to the extent that we are culpable for their behavior. Now, every human being has agency. Of course, they are culpable, but we prepared them in every possible way through the kind of education we gave them about how girls are different from boys, how girls are subject to different rules and regulations. So that enabled them to not only commit this crime, but then justify it.
That's true.
And feel no remorse and no regret, as anyone who sees this enlightening, extraordinary, but very, very shocking film, of course, will realize that they felt no regret even, because they said she was out at night after dark, she was with a boy who was not her husband. She not only deserved it, but they actually say and believe that they had a duty to teach her a lesson. That is the degree and extent of entrenched programming. And we as society, you know, as the peddlers of socio-cultural thinking, we are responsible for that, and we need to take our share of responsibility. And the only other thing I want to tell you about that film and how that led to the Think Equal movement and program is this, that at a certain point I looked at these men and I thought, what do all of you have in common? And And I realized that actually only one of them had finished secondary school. So I thought, well, that must be significant. And then I found myself in front of their lawyers, who
Oh,
had not only finished secondary school, but had finished tertiary education, had the most prominent and sophisticated degree of access to education one can have. And yet they were actually worse than the rapists in their utterances, in their worldview. And it seemed absolutely clear to me that if mindset is the problem, which clearly it is, if mindset is the disease, and the violence that erupts from that mindset is the symptom of that disease, well, we're not going to change anything until we change the mindset. So how do we change mindset?
mm-hmm.
We change mindset through education. There is no other way. But the critical thing, and this is what that film showed me so clearly, the critical thing is, what kind of education?
It's true. What kind of education? Because we have education almost everywhere in the world, right? And your
So-called
so-called.
education.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the purpose of the education we have? Now, that is what the making of this film spiraled me off on this path of trying to find out what kind of education is required to avoid that inevitability that children will grow up to rape, to bully, to be violent, to commit suicide, to become depressed. How do we stop this in its tracks? What do we have to educate our children with? Well, it's absolutely clear. We have to educate them, and at the right time. That was the next step in my progressive research on this subject. First, it was to understand who designed the education system we have, when, for what purpose.
Yes.
Well, very clearly, Anna, it was designed in and for the Industrial Revolution. And its
Many
purpose,
years ago, yeah.
absolutely, that's more than
Centuries.
200 years. And its purpose was to put children in factories. So, it's not in any way trying to promote a holistic education or even a useful education beyond factories. Nothing about life, nothing about values, morality, how to be a dignified, decent human being. So that was the first set of understandings that I sort of gleaned from this research, is that it's all about contents of education and it's not being taught. So, whose responsibility is it to teach it was my next question, because clearly as a world we leave it to the parents, right? We say it's their job to teach our children how to behave right.
But parents themselves, probably they've been through this same education.
That's absolutely correct. They have never learned. How can the parents teach the children when the parents don't know and are mired in the kind of discrimination that all they can do is they pass it on cyclically, generationally, from one generation to the next. So surely it has to be the job of the policymakers, the educators, the governments, those who say and recognize that they have a duty of care to our children, our young citizens. And the next thing that I was determined to research and be accurate about was, when is this teaching most effective and most impactful? So I read up about child development, and it became very clear to me very quickly that to make the most impactful change, you have to go in as young as possible. 0 to 6 really is what we're talking about. Now, I'm ambitious, but I'm not naive or unrealistic. And it seemed to me that it would be absolutely impossible to get into the homes. How are we going to get into, if we say it is every child's right to have this foundation for positive life outcomes? How can we get into the homes? Even if we were welcome in every home, how are we going to do that? So the obvious place to teach this is in educational settings is in preschool, in early childhood sites, in reception classes, and as early as possible. And the neuroscientists are very clear that there is an optimal window for setting foundations when the brain is sensitive and neuroplastic, and you can change attitudes and behaviors. And that is really up to the age of 6. So the Think Equal program, which we then, as a result of this inquiry and research, designed together with experts in the world in gender, in psychology, neuroscience, education. We gathered these extraordinary brains, people like Sir Ken Robinson and Vicky Colbert from Escuela Nueva in Colombia, and Barbara Isaacs of Montessori, the 2 co-founders of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, etc. And amazing people. I could go on, and I'm leaving out some extraordinarily prominent and brilliant people. Professor Richard Davidson from the Institute for Healthy Minds. I must stop myself because otherwise I'll spend half an hour just naming the beautiful names of these supporters and champions. And we've taken best practice from them wherever we could. So, for example, the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence has this extraordinary program called the Ruler Program, which has 2 components, the mood meter and the meta moment, and they teach emotional literacy and emotional self-control. And Dr. Urvashi Sani from India is an expert in empowering girls through education. So all in all, we have gathered together best practice and then created what doesn't exist.
So Leslee, your program is based on emotional intelligence, as you mentioned it. So what?
No. Emotional intelligence is a critical pillar of this program, but emotional intelligence is 2 out of 25 competencies and skills that we believe we have to teach our children in order for them to have positive outcomes in life. So in addition to that, we teach them critical thinking, peaceful conflict resolution, problem solving, resilience, gender equality. And I can tell you there's not one program I've come across that deals with socio-emotional skills or so-called 21st century skills. It always makes me laugh, that title, because genuinely, we didn't need it in any other century. But, anyway, there is no other program that I've come across that teaches gender equality. Well, no wonder we live in a world of such appalling inequality between men and women of epidemic proportions.
Yeah. So you are saying that it's important to educate. So we are educating our heads and heads our children. But what you are saying, that missing component is education of our hearts and hearts of our children. And this is what,
100%.
Right? And so this is what you're creating, different aspects that you add on. And so it's a well-rounded program that you're offering right now.
Absolutely. And do you know who said education of the head without education of the heart is no education at all? Aristotle.
Aristotle, yes.
And do you know how long ago? 2,500 years ago. What have we been doing since then? Sleepwalking?
Well, yeah, we are getting there, right? Thanks to you, Leslee, and thanks to your team. So
thanks to a lot of people. I have to say, we are only one of many people who at last are determined to address this. And at last, we have governments recognizing this. We have the UN and its bodies. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm incredibly privileged and honored to now be part of the task force of Jeffrey Sachs, who was incredibly instrumental in creating the Sustainable Development Goals for the world. And this is a unifying, extraordinary framework which is enabling us at last to really focus in a concerted way on quality holistic education, goal 4.7. It's critical that we get on and do this as a matter of urgency.
Matter of urgency, right? I'm curious, Leslee, how did it all start? So you had this idea and you knew that you had to change something. And you started reaching to all those people. How did it work after that? Were they willing to do that right away, or you've had some hard times to put everything together?
No, it was absolutely plain sailing. It was as though, this was meant to be, and we experience that in this office here at Think Equal on a weekly basis. We think a thought, we think we need, and within 24, 48 hours, somehow it materializes.
Oh,
Because
wow.
the energies of the world are actually
Yes.
bent now upon getting this right, it makes me so optimistic. And I have my feet very firmly on the ground. I'm not someone who believes in, yeah, sure, we have coincidences. We have a lot of coincidences.
Mhm.
But, there is something extraordinary about these combined energies that are creating magic. And I'm part of a lot of, groups of extraordinary organizations and individuals who are doing this work. So, thank heavens it is a joint effort, because nobody can do this work alone.
It's true.
No one organization can do this. And there is enormous power. Goals 17 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is partnerships for the goals. And actually, without partnerships, we can do nothing.
Great.
We have to join hands in this work.
Yes. So it takes a village to raise a kid, right? It takes all our efforts to raise children.
Well, it
Together,
does. It does, absolutely. But the important thing is how we
How?
raise them.
It's true.
It's not who raises them or whether they are raised. It's how we raise them. On what contents of education do we steer their course? Because clearly, if we wanted to create children who are soldiers of a particular faith or soldiers of a particular army or ethnicity or color or economic background, we can do it. We're doing it all the time. We're saying, you are of this privileged sect, the others, they don't know. The minute you say to a child, there is another who is of lesser worth than you, or somebody who you don't particularly need to bother with or empathize with, you have just created a monster. It's as simple as that. Human beings are much more alike than they are unlike, said Maya Angelou. And how true is that? And as Mandela said, here's a really beautiful, inspirational quote of Nelson Mandela. He said, "No child is born hating another human being because of the color of his skin, his religion, gender, any other factor. A child has to be taught to hate. If he can be taught to hate, he can be taught to love."
But Leslie, you're saying that the best age is from from 0 to 6. What about older kids? Do you have something for them?
We don't. Thank heavens, others do.
Others do.
But, you have to make a choice. If you're going to do incredibly widespread, global, difficult work, I think it's unrealistic to say we can do it all. We can't be all things to all children. So we have decided to focus on 3 to 6. We don't focus on 0 to 3, even knowing how critical and important those years are. We focus on 3 to 6 because our mission is focused on schools or education settings. We want a system change in education. That is what we're going for. And early years education is where we're focused. Why? For a number of reasons. Partly because, as I say, the neuroscientists are clear that that's the best time. The 90% of the human brain is formed by the age of 5. Why would we want to wait until after the optimal window of modifiability if we want to set the foundation straight? Do you first build the building and then go in and put in the foundations? No, you don't, for a very good reason. However, is it needed for this work to carry on? Yes, of course, the more the better. Having said that, though, I need to tell you that there is so much evidence over 40 and 50 years now that shows that if this social emotional learning and quality education is taught well, consistently, repetitively, and with high quality, it lasts into adulthood. And that stands to reason, because it's a question of the physical architecture of the brain. When you teach a child or mediate experientially to that child empathy and practice it, the child is forming neural pathways in his or her brain. And once they are formed, they are as hard edged, as the ones that are formed for division and subtraction. So that's another reason why I get appalled when people call these soft skills. There's nothing soft about neuroconnections that enable a child to respect another child.
And your program is already installed in many countries, 13 countries.
That's right. Actually, 14.
14.
I believe it's 14, because we're just starting now in Trinidad Tobago, having partnered with UNESCO to do that.
Great. So do you hear any feedback? Do teachers share with you any shifts in behavior?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. And I have to tell you, when I am on my 18th hour of the day and feeling absolutely shattered and exhausted, the things that flood me with energy afresh and optimism and light are those very stories. I mean, I could literally sit here for 3-4 days and tell you story after story after story, and we do document them. We're beginning to get better at sharing them and disseminating them. It's just the most heartening thing imaginable. We have teachers constantly telling us about a little girl who, for example, was literally a racist at 3 years old. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, in the classroom, she would not touch the hand of a dark-skinned friend. Just wouldn't do it. Her mother came running into class, having brought her to school one day, and said to the teacher, and this was, I think, 6 weeks into the program, and said to the teacher, what have you just taught the children? Please, please, tell me, what have you just taught them, like yesterday or a week or something ago, very recently? And the teacher actually got a bit of a fright and thought, well, is this a complaint? What is this? And she said, just tell me why, and then I'll tell you what we may have been teaching. And the mother said, because I've had the most terrible problem at home. My daughter doesn't like dark skin, she said, as though sharing this, secret. She said she was born that way.
Yeah.
She just doesn't. So my maid, who's been in the family for a generation at least, and we can't get rid of her, but she's very dark. And my daughter won't let her dress her or feed her, or won't let her near her. She said it's okay in the mornings because I dress the child before I go to work, and then I bring her here to school. But when I come home from work, my daughter is starving because she hasn't let the maid near her to feed her. And this morning, she said, I find her caressing this maid's arm and saying to her, look, do you see, you are dark brown, like chocolate, which is delicious. And I am light brown like cinnamon, which is also delicious. And did you know that we are all a brown family? We're just different types of brown. Because that's what we teach them. Because it is a lie when you say that I am white and someone else is black. You look at that person who you're calling black, look at their hair. Tell me that their skin is also black.
Right.
I mean, it's a nonsense. It's a palpable lie. And it's a destructive lie. Because in our language, we use metaphors in a really negative and destructive way. We talk about the black heart of the villain, the black mark against your name, the black sheep in the family. What are we trying to do to children's psyches, So putting that right at the earliest age is critically important to their future success as human beings.
And last time you showed me a couple of examples of the books that you have, and you have a couple of examples on your website too. Do you have something to show us right now?
Right now, yes, I do. So here we have Sizwe's smile. Sizwe is a lovely boy who spreads his smile, And this smile literally lights up the community. And so this is a book about sharing and kindness. We then have a book called Diego's Great Idea, which is a book about inclusion. We have I Love My Planet, which teaches our 3-year-olds to do just that, to recycle, to encourage their parents, which they do, to share rides, to take a bus or walk rather than take the car. We have children who advise their teachers to switch off their computers because of the electricity.
You see the impact you're having right now. It's not only educating children, but actually children go ahead and transmit it to their parents, adults.
That is true, Anna. That's absolutely true. And we have so many stories of that I can't begin to tell you. One child who the parents reported at a parent-teacher evening that they were having a little row, and their child came up in front of them as they were shouting at each other and said, "Mummy, Daddy, stop shouting. Every problem has a solution."
Oh, okay.
And these are 3.5 and 3-year-old and 4-year-old kids, you know. How we feel obviously deals with. Now, do you notice how all these books, Me, Myself, and I is self-esteem, all these books have artists from all over the world.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that is critical, I think, is to show children differences and, you know, to teach the message that you are the other me and I'm the other you, and we're all different, but we are all to be celebrated and we are all one human family. So we're teaching them global citizenship. And every book and every resource we have has to reflect that, of course. So we've had to create our own books, and we've created 80 books, written and illustrated in the course of 2 years, which is quite, even if I say myself, an amazing achievement. And of course, it is that sense of urgency and purpose that has enabled us to do it. But what the teachers get, I'd love to show you just the set
tell me.
Of what the teachers get in their hands. So I've shown you a few of the books, right? Every level of this program, and there are 3 levels. Level 1 is for the 3 to 4-year-olds. Level 2 is for the 4 to 5-year-olds. Level 3 for the 5 to 6-year-olds. And each level is 30 weeks long. And in each week, we have a book normally that floats that theme of that week and those competencies and outcomes that we want during that week. 3 lessons in that week. Each lesson is approximately 45 minutes. And the children, by the way, are enwrapped by these lessons. I once came across some teachers in Scotland saying to me, "Our children can't sit for more than 10 minutes. This is nonsense. I have seen children want another lesson immediately. A Think Equal lesson is over. They want another one. They sit through it. When it is extraordinarily powerful teaching like this, they love it. So what we give the teachers in their hand at the end of the training is 23 books, because every of the 30-week programs have 7 weeks of mindfulness. In level 1, it is a program called the Kindness Curriculum, and that's Professor Richard Davidson's amazing work. Level 2 is the C curriculum, Social, Emotional, and Ethical, which is a collaboration between the Dalai Lama and Emory University. And so 23 books, I've shown you some of them, and then we give them in their hand a resource booklet. And in this booklet are all the resources they will need to teach the Think Equal lessons. And this is, of course, the most important, which is the booklet of lesson plans. And these lesson plans are incredibly clearly set out, and they are prescriptive, and they have to be. this is not because we can't trust teachers to work out how to teach these
Of
things.
course, no, yeah.
This is not about, you know, pussyfooting around and worrying about patronizing teachers. We say to the teachers, listen, in the early years, there are incredible unevennesses of training as far as the teachers are concerned. And you get the most trained and the least trained. You get some teachers in early childhood who can't read and write. And then we have a problem because you have to be able to read in order to follow the lesson plans. So in a couple of schools actually recently, early year settings, we swapped 2 assistants who could read from 2 settings with another 2 assistants who were with teachers who couldn't read, so that the assistants can now read out the lesson plans to the teachers and the teachers perform them.
Oh.
But as long as you can read, you can mediate this critical work to the children. And what matters here is that the children get it by all means.
Great.
They have to get it. So effectively, you have line by line instructions. They are fairly open as instructions go. So we're not saying fill the children's head with, you know, absolutely not. We encourage this to be a co-creation of knowledge and experience between the child and the other children and the teacher. But it certainly is a question of saying to the teachers, ask this question. Let the children discuss this amongst themselves. Now point out that. Now suggest that perhaps ask them. And so that way there is an absolute, it's like a vaccination. You take this much of that and this much of that, it's a recipe, right? And then the child, by the end of that lesson, has learned certain competencies and skills that produce certain outcomes. And that is the foundation that then nurtures and helps the child throughout that child's life. So that is how it works.
And it complements the curricular teachers already have.
It always does that. We have never yet come across a case where the early years curriculum that's been prescribed by the government or the Department of Social Development, or, you know, because early years very often falls in different agencies. In Sri Lanka, for example, where we are with 14,400 children at the moment, it falls under the Ministry of Local Government and provincial councils. So however it falls, basically whatever the early years framework is, this fits it. Because the world does know now what is needed, you know, and they call it different things. Some call it personal social health. Some call it, you know, 21st century skills, but it all amounts to the same thing, really.
Of course.
Teaching children to be dignified and to live respecting the dignity of others. That's what it boils down to.
And this is so important. It's leaving legacy on this planet behind us, right? Leaving something in the hearts and minds in future generations.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Leslie, for doing this. And so you have this program for teachers. I think you have for parents too.
No, sadly, we don't yet have a program for parents. Again, do you know, I don't think we need to create one because I think there are programs.
Since already it's in schools, yes.
And you know, we much admire those and are grateful and thankful that people are doing them brilliantly. I don't think we ever want to reinvent the wheel. And in a sense, you know, what we have done here is where we perceive there is a real serious gap.
Got it.
I mean, I would challenge anyone to go out researching for, you know, many programs or any programs that really have this comprehensive take on social emotional learning as being, a fundamental, we say core purpose of early years. And it's one thing to give an after school program or a 6-week course in something, or a 12 weeks meditation course, or all of that is brilliant and it helps. But really, we're saying, what is early years education all about?
Okay.
They can learn to form letters and numbers and read and write at a later stage. Can they adequately learn these social emotional competencies and skills at a later stage? I would challenge that personally. I don't think that you can.
The best way to get the program for teachers and schools out there is to go on your website.
Yes, to contact us.
Yeah.
Basically, we find it very hard to just do single schools, as it were, because we're with 38,000 kids so far, and we're going to reach 1.1 million children in the next 3 years. And the way we're going to do that is by working with networks and groups of schools. So if you contact us as an individual school, we may well be saying to you, look, this is how it works. We will, come and train, but we need a cohort of at least 20 schools for us to be able to come out. And then we need a partner on the ground who will implement and continue the work, because we can't just do sporadic work here and there. For us, every single child has a right to this learning. And if we allow our energies to be spent on small groups, and it takes several years as a result to reach many children, we are failing the children who we are there to serve. So we have to do it at a certain scale. But we've done it now in, 13 and about to be 14 countries. So we know how to do that. And the program is incredibly inexpensive. I mean, the materials, the training, we don't put any markup on anything. Obviously, there is a cost to delivering it, but we don't, our trainers go and train. We don't charge for those trainers because they're in our employ. We get the books printed. That cost is what the cost is. We're not here to make profits, right? We are here as a charity and a philanthropy to ensure that every child gets this. So, we will ensure that we spread this as quickly and widely as we can. It's been designed to be replicable. It's designed to be scalable, and it's proving so. It's
proving so, yes. And so could you please remind us the website we should go to?
www.thinkequal, one word, thinkequal.org.
Okay, great. Thinkequal.org, thank you. So we are going to the end of our interview. Thank you, Leslee. I know you have a gift for our audience. Could you please tell us more what it is?
Well, I thought that it would be really interesting for people to see the original film that I made, which has all these insights in it, which led me to understand the problem so clearly that it led me to also see the solution with equal clarity. And I will send a link to the film so they can see it for free to anyone who contacts us on the Think Equal website.
I'll post the link.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Leslee, for all your work and for this program that you're offering to the world and for the impact that you are doing. I think it's very important, as you say, to educate the hearts of our children. And it was my greatest pleasure having you on this summit. Thanks for your time. And
thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening. Please let me know if you have any questions, if you found this interview informative, and we'll see you next time.